44.2 billion rand worth of TV licenses is owed to the SABC. That's by 9.2 million TV license accounts or holders. This was revealed by the state broadcaster while briefing Parliament's Portfolio Committee and Communication and Digital Technologies on their 5-year strategy to exit their financial crisis. Now, the plan includes revenue growth of 28% to 6.4 billion rand in the year 2024 to 2025, based on an increase in advertising revenue, sponsorships, and TV license income. But what do we make of this plan? Well, to answer that question, we are joined by Media Monitoring Africa's William Bird. William, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with the basic one: is why does this matter that we talk about a functional broadcasting commission?
So, good morning. It matters because the SABC is the public broadcaster. We know that democracies where there are high levels of trust in institutions, democracies that function well, where there's more media diversity, have in common a sustainable, independent, credible public broadcaster. So a public broadcaster is essential for South Africa's media environment. It's essential for audiences across South Africa. Currently, SABC Radio reaches on average just under half the population on a weekly basis. We know that a third of the South African population rely exclusively on free-to-air services, which includes SABC still as their only form of access to television. So the SABC matters a great deal. It's also the one that has the mandate to deliver children's programs, to deliver information and programming for people in marginalized groups where there isn't commercial revenue. So it matters because the SABC is the one that covers and reports in all of the official languages and is able to cover the elections in a far more diverse manner than any of our other broadcasters because they are around the country.
So let's talk a little bit about what we've heard from them right now about what they're proposing as their funding model. They've talked about possibly in their 5-year strategy being able to see themselves generate revenue that essentially will see them no longer needing to rely on the fiscus or on treasury to keep them afloat. The likelihood that we could see that happen, and then we'll look at the numbers.
So, unfortunately, what we're seeing is government actively defunding the public broadcaster. Quite why they're doing that is a mystery, unless there are efforts to sell it. But it's clear that government is not interested in trying to actually have a sustainable public broadcaster. In that context, the SABC doesn't really have any choice but to try and work out some method of going it alone. Of course, what hamstrings the SABC are two things. One, it's operating in an environment, a policy environment that's over 2 decades old. And two, it still has to meet its public mandate requirements. So it's caught between a rock and a hard place, and it has to deliver on its public mandate. It has to deliver in official languages, and it somehow has to find itself the money to do so because government is unwilling to support the SABC.
Yeah, one of the proposals made by the SABC, of course, has been, and this is something that's come up as they've looked to process the SABC bill that you have taken issue with as well, alongside organizations like the South African Editors Forum. But one of the proposals that have been made by the SABC is the household levy to replace the TV license. I mean, just the feasibility of that working when 9.2 million TV license accounts are in arrears, and you know they're missing 44 billion rand from those TV license holders.
Yeah, look, I don't, the TV license issue is one that has been beset by problems for decades. Part of it is about effective collection mechanisms and people finding too easy ways of not paying it, but also that is a kind of regressive tax, which is to say that whether you're earning 50,000 rand or 150,000 rand a month, where as opposed to earning 2,000 rand a month, the TV license fee remains the same. And for those that are earning a lot of money, it's barely anything, and for those that aren't, it's hardly anything. So you're seeing the devaluation of public interest content because those that have resources are in fact going to digital media to find their content. So they're seemingly reluctant to do it. So one of the things you say is, if we acknowledge that we want a public broadcaster or a public content provider to meet the needs of our diverse society, which we do, especially in terms of news and especially in terms of things like children's content and children's programming, then we have to say, how do we fund that? And one of the ways is through a public levy. And that's not an unreasonable idea. It's just about how that's implemented and where it gets collected. The problem is, again, as I've said, is that when SABC is approached several years ago now under the previous board, they put forward clear, concrete and urgent proposals for the government to look at and try and review so that they could address its financial situation, and they failed to do any of those. Centec is one of the biggest costs for broadcasters. The SABC is paying a huge amount for that. It's one of the most prohibitive factors for community TV. It should be something that's covered by the state, frankly, and the SABC is left to carry this enormous bill, and it's one of the things that makes its model even less sustainable.
Just talk to me about just how serious the situation could get. You've got the SABC chairperson, Katura Mukumba, essentially saying that in March, the public broadcaster narrowly missed a day zero, which would have meant a complete blackout of TV and radio services. I mean, is that alarmist? Is that realistic?
I mean, I think the scenario is absolutely catastrophic. You know, you've had the SABC finances plummeting. You had government failing to, and Parliament failing to do their job when they failed to appoint a board for more than 6 months. Then, so that was something where you then can't get contracts signed, you can't do all sorts of things. And then when government doesn't provide any kind of a bailout or even a loan guarantee, which is what they've done previously, you're leaving the SABC in an impossible position. So, it's not a stretch to think that we will be looking at a blackout. SABC is really being put in an increasingly impossible position. And the people that need to answer for that is, of course, government. It's an election year. We should be demanding of them why they are actively defunding the public broadcast and not making sure that it's able to operate sustainably.
I want to look at the numbers just in the strategy that they've put together, right? They essentially look at the numbers coming out of the 2022-2023 financial year, looking at how the broadcaster would have seen or did see a net loss of 1 billion rand in that financial year. But they're projecting that in the year 2026 to 2027, they could make a profit of 907 million rand. Do those numbers make sense? Do they have the skills to get them there?
I mean, they're trying to do their best, and with some of the digital things, you would recently have seen that they've done a deal with BBC as an example. Whether or not they're going to be able to reach those numbers is going to be a different thing. When you put in a position where your audiences are declining because all the best programming isn't on your channel because you can't afford to be buying and producing the best programming, it means people are going to leave you. And then if your news is going to be undermined by interference efforts, then it means people have even less reason to be going there. So they are trying to make miracles in an incredibly tough environment. What is clear is that the SABC staying alive and existence is not just in our interest as a civil society organisation and bodies like SOS's interest. It's in all of our interests as the public, as the media sector, that the SABC is somehow able to carry on going.
Yeah, talk to me about the steps that Media Monitoring Africa then is taking alongside SOS, which is Save Our SABC, as well as the South African National Editors Forum, to continue this discussion, particularly with lawmakers.
I mean, I think one of the critical things is actually to advance the policy. We keep getting delays in that policy. The current minister introduced a bad new version of the draft white paper. The previous minister got the white paper and then decided to shelve it. So we need government to show a huge sense of urgency, because it's not just the SABC that's finding this an incredibly difficult environment. Our policy environment is 2 decades old. 20 years ago, you didn't have all of these social media doing the things that they're doing. You didn't have the Netflix and the Amazons and all of these massive multinationals doing the kinds of things that they're doing. You need something that allows our media to compete at least on some kind of a playing field.
Yeah.
At the moment, SABC is being expected to produce a mandate greater than anyone else. produce all of the programming, and then compete with the likes of all of the biggest broadcasters from around the world. It's an extraordinary thing to be expecting and demanding them to do. So we will be pushing hard for the white paper and policy process to move ahead. Hopefully, when we get a new government and new parliamentarians, they'll take their job a little bit more seriously than the last set of parliamentarians. Of course, what's going to happen in our elections is anyone's guess, but it's really critical that we put these issues there and that we're able to build a sustainable media and broadcast sector.
This is one of the comments that was made by the former board member of the SABC, Matata Zedu, who said there's chaos at the SABC with rampant corruption and fraud affecting the company's performance. But with any other state-owned entity in this country where we start hearing about murmurs of fraud and corruption, I mean, it was just in December where there was a massive discussion around possible ghost workers within the SABC, costing the SABC close to hundreds of thousands of rands, some could have put forward. Why then are we not seeing legal proceedings, investigations into what is going on if there are these allegations of fraud and corruption?
I mean, I think that the SABC has done a lot more than most state-owned enterprises to try and clean up its act. So certainly we saw significant efforts to recover, for example, the money stolen by Hlaudi Motsoeneng, the ill-gotten gains across the board there. We're seeing consistent efforts across the SABC over the previous board and even to an extent the current board to try and address these issues of corruption. When it's been endemic, we know, as it is with all of our public entities, it's an incredibly hard thing to take an entity that's struggling and rebuild it at the same time as make sure that it's actually able to function. So I'm not sure that those are the current critical issues. The current critical issues is that it's expected to operate and raise more than 80% of its money from advertising, when that advertising model globally has just about fallen apart. So it's a nearly impossible task.